innovation and performance across every level of his 25,000 employee organization. And he's going to share some of those principles with us today. You're going to love the presentation today, so I want to give him as much time as he can have. He's going to save 10 minutes at the end today for you. If you've got questions, we'll have the microphone that will kind of come around and we'll share that. Randy's been gracious enough today as well to allow us to record today's presentation. And so if you have friends or family or coworkers who couldn't be here today that you want to share this with, it'll be up at familyresource.info on our video page by the end of the week here. So would you welcome Randy Darcy?
Thanks, Brian. Thank you very much. Okay, well, good morning, or good afternoon, I guess it is almost. First of all, I wanted to tell you that Brian has not seen this presentation. He doesn't really know whether you're going to like it or not, right? But I am delighted to be here with you today and to chat with you a little bit about innovation. Innovation has a real soft spot in my heart, and that's simply because in my 27 years with General Mills, there was nothing that was as rewarding, nothing as challenging as implementing innovation broadly across the company. And probably more importantly, for that period of time in General Mills that we're going to talk about today, our financial performance was very, very good. And it was a direct result of the innovative efforts that we were putting in place at that particular time. And, you know, when I think about today and the amount of change that we're seeing in the world today and all the things that are happening so quickly, I think innovation is more important today than it's ever been. And I think it's important, although I'll be talking about a large company with thousands and thousands of employees, I think the basic principles we'll chat about today are applicable to almost anything you do, whether you're a small company, a small organization. I think they're principles that can apply to your family, to your marriage, you know, to your kids, almost anything that goes on. There are some principles here. So I'd like to encourage you to think of it broadly like that. And how could some of these things maybe impact not just my organization, but also, you know, what happens in my family. There was a period of time, General Mills has always been pretty innovative, and I'll share some of the reasons why I'm saying that. But there was an important time where we really faced some significant business challenges. And at that point in time, we had to approach innovation completely different than we have in the past. And I'll share some stories with you today about why that was the case and what we did. And I'm hoping that you'll find the stories both interesting, but more importantly, I think there is some insight there that you might be able to apply to what you might be doing. I'm going to take maybe, I don't know, several years worth of hard work and try to boil it down to 45 minutes. So we'll end up at the end of the day with maybe 4 or 5 key learnings, and those are on that handout that's at your table there, as well as a few recommendations. If any of you are interested in trying to foster a more innovative culture, there's a couple of suggestions on what you might do there that were really successful within General Mills. So does that sound okay for the next 30 minutes or so? Thumbs up on that? All right, well, first of all, I have to read something to you. Everybody ready? No accounts or reproduction of this presentation may be used, copied, or rebroadcast without the express written consent of the Lunch and Learn Executive Committee. Got that? Brian, where are you? You didn't even know you had an executive committee, did you? Right? I'm on it. Obviously, I'm just kidding about that, but I did want to go on record recording it that this is not, in no way is it a General Mills corporate communication, public communication. This is General Mills innovation based on and what Randy Darcy remembers. So let's just start with a little bit of history on General Mills, which I think will be helpful for you. I'm assuming most of you know a little bit about our company. We're headquartered here in Minneapolis, and we were founded on the riverbanks of the Mississippi River. And some of you may have been to the museum that's downtown that has a lot of that history built into it. But our company was started with Washburn Crosby Milling Company, and at the time the product they were producing was gold medal flour. And they had just changed the name to Gold Medal Flour because it had just won 3 gold medals. And I guess what back then they had milling contests. And they'd won 3 gold medals, and so Washburn Crosby decided that they would change the name of their product to Gold Medal. And the reason that the product was so good was innovation. They were actually the first milling company that started using steel milling rolls and purification systems, which was brand new technology to make their flour. And it was dramatically better than anything else in the marketplace that I'm aware of that General Mills had. But then they went on to introduce Wheaties in 1921, I believe it was. And that was the first wheat flake product that was introduced, cereal product that was introduced in the United States. And then in 1926, General Mills produced and aired the very first commercial over the radio. And we hired some barbershop, it was, and they produced. Take a listen to it. See what you think.
Have you tried Wheaties? They're whole wheat with all of the bran. Won't you try Wheaties? For wheat is the best food of man. They're crispy and crunchy the whole year through. The kiddies never tire of them, and neither will you. So just buy Wheaties, the best breakfast food in the land.
Pretty good, huh? Wouldn't that make you want to run out and buy a box of Wheaties? I told Kathy when I was putting this together, I said, now if this clip doesn't work, let's see if I can get, there we go. If this clip doesn't work, I want you to practice singing this commercial, and I'll just bring it in and you can do it. But that was the first commercial. And then when Cheerios, which if you look at Cheerios and all of the flanker brands of Cheerios, if that was a standalone company, that would be the biggest cereal company in the entire world. Our other products was a with Cheerios. Can you guys hear me without this? Okay, or do I need it?
We're going to cord you up. You will not have a problem.
How's that? That's even better.
As soon as we turn you up. There you go.
There we go. How's that? Is that too loud? Okay, so anyway, but Cheerios was the result of an innovation that was called the James Cooker, and one of the General Mills engineers actually developed this piece of technology that would allow us to actually puff these little O's and have a unique taste and texture. And for many, many years, people have tried to copy a Cheerio, and to my knowledge, to this day, nobody's been able to replicate the taste and the texture of a Cheerio. And again, it's just a direct result of innovation. These product lines that you see here, every year we would develop and introduce at least 20, and sometimes years it'd be even more than that, new products and line extensions, most of which had some type of innovation built into the product. So I'm just telling you this to verify that General Mills had a history of innovation from day one. But most of that innovation, and this is really important, was focused on new products, new technology, and marketing and advertising. That's really where we were strong. But there was a period of time, as I mentioned earlier in our history, where we faced a tsunami of challenges that we hadn't anticipated. We were finding that consumers were beginning to move away from processed foods. Families were on the go like never before, and they wanted products that they could take with them. They wanted better quality products. They wanted healthier products. But the thing that we faced that was probably by far and away the biggest challenge for us was an inflation rate was forecasted to be 7.5% to 15%. And what that meant for our company was literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of incremental cost would be coming our way. And those costs just simply could not be passed on to our consumers. If we had done that, we definitely would have lost both brand loyalty and we would have lost our unit volume growth. So we knew, the executive team knew pretty early that we were facing a daunting challenge here. And there was just no way we were going to be able to meet our financial goals going forward. So like most companies, and you see this today when you're in an inflationary period of time and the business is a little soft, almost immediately everybody will go to cost cutting, right? Some of us probably experienced that. Cutting staff, cutting capabilities. And of course, we looked at that time, and that would have been part of our overall plan. But we also said, is there a way that we could innovate more broadly than we ever have before? Could we innovate to the point where we could offset all or maybe some of this inflationary pressure that we were going to be feeling? And that's really where our story starts today. But before we do that, I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes and let's talk a little bit about innovation. See if we can get that slide up there. There we go. So innovation, I found this definition, which I think is really good, is the practical implementation of ideas that result in the introduction of new products or services or a way organizations and teams operate more effectively. You know, I think that really captures what we were trying to do going forward. And when you think about what we've experienced in just the last 2 years, you know, there's been a tremendous amount of innovation. It seems to be the pace at which innovation is happening, big time innovation, just exceeds anything I've ever seen in the past. I just, you know, would just ask you to think about what kind of innovations have you guys seen over the last year and a half, 2 years? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Just holler it out. Say that one more time. Yeah, absolutely. What else? AI, artificial intelligence. That's probably the leading issue that we're looking at right now. Very good. What else? Anything else? What about aviation, Gary? You see any innovation in? Somebody else had something over here. Tesla, the electric car, right, exactly. If you look at them, I tried to put together a list of the things that come to mind for me. And these were just some of the product innovations that you know, really strike me as being ones that really revolutionize, in some cases, the marketplace. You know, chip technology, the silicon chip was, I think, early 1960s it was developed, and it just continues to develop. You know, every year you see something new there that's pretty dramatic. But look at all of these different changes that really revolutionize the marketplace. Kathy and I are both pilots, and one thing that really stood out for me is one of the planes that we have an opportunity to fly every now and then. Just recently, within about the last 13 months, they developed a technology, a very innovative technology, and they're calling it HomeSafe. And so if you're in the airplane and your pilot becomes incapacitated for some reason, the passengers can just reach up and push a button. And we fly these planes now not with the old steam gauges that you probably have seen on TV, but we have things called flight displays, right? And it's just like flying with a video game. Well, those flight displays go blank. And then the message comes up to the passengers that says, "Do not touch anything in the cockpit," which I thought is kind of interesting, because you could imagine somebody trying to come up there and fly the airplane. Don't touch anything in the cockpit, because the autopilot has taken over the airplane, and we're going to land this airplane safely. That's basically the message. And then the plane is capable of reading the weather, finding an appropriate airport with that weather, loading an approach to fly to the airport. It contacts ATC, and it tells ATC the airplane is declaring an emergency. It descends the plane onto the approach, puts down the flaps, the gear, lands the plane, pulls back the power, and shuts the plane off. So, I mean, can you imagine that? Can you imagine what that's going to do to general aviation? And the old Jetsons, some of you are not old enough to remember the Jetsons, but the day when you can probably crawl into a general aviation aircraft and not have a pilot in there and fly from here to California, that's probably not too far away. So those are all product innovations, big-time product innovations. But what about organizational innovations? You know, I think about the sports teams that are out there, the professional sports teams, and just think about, it seems like every year, especially in football, you know, they're talking about the new innovative offensive strategy, you know, that they're bringing to the game, or the new defensive strategy. And most of the time they seem to be different, and they seem to be working. The other thing that is pretty impressive here is how well they now are able to project what an 18-year-old coming out of high school, what that 18-year-old's going to be able to do 3 or 4 years from now physically on the football field, right? And it's no guessing game anymore. It's a science that they put together. They've really revolutionized how they look at athletes, how they look at professional athletes. When I think about the twins and Rocco, I don't know much about this, but I understand that statistical analysis is very innovative. That's providing, as Brian said earlier today, it's providing services and capabilities that you typically would not see coming out of a church. The fact that they planted or started a coffee shop close to the University of Minnesota so we could connect with students at the University of Minnesota is something that you typically don't see. All of those are innovations that really make a big, big difference. And so the first key learning for all of us, it's coming. I think it's coming. Innovation. Yeah. There we go. Whoop. let's see. Let's go to, can we back up a little bit? You guys are going to get all this in 60 seconds? Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can move it now.
Sorry, Randy. We'll take care of it. You just tell us next.
Okay. All right. We can do that. Let's see where we are here. Okay, this is the right slide. No, we've got to back up. Couple more. Keep going. Keep going back. Keep going back. There we go. There we go. Okay, right there. Okay, we can forward one more. There we go. Okay, there we are. So first key learning is that innovation really is the lifeblood of an organization, a business, almost anything that we do. You know, I kind of liken it to the red blood cells in our body that are carrying life-sustaining oxygen, right, to all the tissues in our body. I think innovation plays that same role with any business or any organization. And that's, you know, I think that's really good news, because if you know how to innovate and you practice innovation, then you have, you know, the world's wide open for you to be able to improve from where you are today to where we're going. And it is great news. So I think that's something that we should celebrate, don't you? That's there. So I want you to help me with something on 3. Thinking about innovation, I want everybody to say yay. Loud enough that they hear us upstairs. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Not so fast. I don't want you to get so excited about this, because, next slide, I've got some bad news for you. Innovation may be terrific, may open the doors for things you've never seen before, you didn't think was capable, but it is really, really difficult to do. And in some cases, I've seen it's impossible. And that's true for a couple of reasons. Let's see if I can sequence this. Oh, never mind. It's due for a couple of reasons. One of them is competency, and especially with organizations or companies that are successful, that are really doing well. And you can just imagine if you're doing well, you know, changing things is a risky proposition for you. And so most successful organizations, most successful companies are just simply going to steer the ship in the same direction. Don't rock the boat, right? If it's not broken, don't try to fix it. And that is a very, very dangerous place to be, I think, because everybody around you is doing what? They're innovating, right? All your competition's innovating, all the organizations around you are innovating, and yet you're sitting there thinking, boy, we're doing really, really well. Let's just keep it going. And just like the boiling frog theory, you wake up one morning and what happens? You find you've got a hole in the bottom of your ship and you're going down, right? And now you're having to really, really, really pedal fast to stay alive. So that's one thing, competency. So if you're part of an organization that is doing really well and is performing well, look out, because you're probably not innovating at the level that you need to. The second thing are these two skills, creativity and conceptualization. Our research showed that in order to be an innovator, in order to do that well, these two skills are really, really important. And let me just read the definition that we used for these two, and think about it, because I'm going to ask you in a second where you would rate yourself in these areas. So for creativity, think about that as being the use of imagination or original ideas to create a product, a concept, or an action. Okay? And then conceptualization, the process of forming concepts, particularly of an abstract nature. So I'd like to see a show of hands of anybody who believes that their two strongest skills would be creativity and conceptualization. Somebody in here. There's 1, 2. I know there's at least one more. Okay, there we go. 2 or 3. So that's very consistent with our research. What our research shows is maybe 1 out of 9, 1 out of 10 people really have those skills, and they're really gifted. And you have probably heard the term think tanks, right? Within universities and within big corporations, and that's where you take people who primarily have these skills, creativity and conceptualization capability, and they put them together. Usually isolate them from all the distractions. In General Mills, in our new product development area, we actually did that to some extent, and you just try to isolate them, and you say, just go think. Just sit around and just talk and think and conceptualize, and they come up with some amazing things. Most of the people that I worked with, I wasn't one of the people that would be in that think tank, but when you talk to them, most of them are PhDs and food scientists, and it's like crazy. I mean, what they can come up with. I'm fortunate to have a mentoring relationship with a young man who is a missionary, and among other things that he does right now, he's a very talented musician. And one of the things that he does is write whole orchestra scores for silent movies. And right now he's working on Phantom of the Opera. And I just love talking to him about this. I don't understand it, but I love talking to him about it and say, so just tell me how you're doing that. And I won't do a good job of explaining this correctly. So those of you that are musician people, forgive me. But it sounds like, he maybe watches the movie, Phantom of the Opera, the silent movie, and then he can kind of see how the score is going to flow, and he lays down a basic score, is what he's told me. And then as he's thinking about it, he can see how the different instruments will come in to that score and play different components of the music, right? And it just blows me away. And then you go to one of his performances, and you see very clever little things that are built into the performance. And I've asked him, so where did that come from? Well, it came from him walking down the street, and he sees something that you and I would walk right by, and all of a sudden, he sees a concept of using that in his performance, right? I mean, it's a very, very gifted person that's able to do that. But only 10% of our population can do it. So what are most of you and me going to do when it comes to innovation? Right? I mean, if we don't have those skills, can we innovate? What are we going to do? Well, let's go back to General Mills for just a second. So we're sitting there with these huge costs coming towards us, huge problems in front of us, and we're asking the question, can we innovate in a way that would really offset most of this challenge that we have in front of us, when only maybe 10, 15% of our population can help us with that? Well, the plane had just begun its initial descent into Sacramento, California, and I closed my notebook and closed my eyes, hoping that I could get maybe 15 minutes worth of rest before the plane landed. Daryl and I had been working on just exactly what we were going to say to the Lodi plant, over 500 people, about the plant's future, and more importantly, about their job as we went forward. Lodi was one of the largest cereal plants and Betty Crocker mix plants that General Mills had in our entire North American system, and it had been in operation for quite a while. But the problem at Lodi is their costs were continually inching up. I mean, they had reached the point over a 2-year period of time, where they were uncompetitive. And Bob Wheeler, the plant manager, had asked me to come out and participate in a working session, primarily with the union stewards and some of the key technicians and management team, to see just exactly how we could manage our way through this. And was there an opening? Was there a way in which we could make it through? And the problem really wasn't the Lodi plant or the team. This equipment, and if you can just imagine a manufacturing production line that stretches the length of this facility, at least the length of this facility. They're large, high-speed operations producing thousands and thousands of packages, every minute. They're virtually untouched. They run with very little manual intervention, and they're very, very efficient. And that's the way they were built when they were put together. And the idea was to produce as much product as you possibly could. You can put it in the warehouse and then move forward. And at that time, we didn't have a lot of variations in products. So maybe we would have Cheerios. They'd produce Cheerios and maybe Honey Nut Cheerios, right? But they didn't have products like, Oat Crunch Cinnamon. And they didn't have Chocolate Cheerios. And they didn't have a number of the different products. But with product proliferation, that meant that these production lines, these huge production lines, had to be shut down and changed over, completely cleaned out and changed over. They also had problems with package sizes. I don't know whether you can see this, but this is these are Betty Crocker products produced on the same line, but you can see the difference in the package size, right, of these two. And so not only did they have to shut down to do cleanouts and washouts, but they also had to shut down, and the entire packing line had to be readjusted. And so instead of doing this like once, maybe twice a month, the poor Lodi plant was having to do it 2 or 3 times a week at 4.5 hours per shutdown. And so you can imagine if your capital is sitting there idle, how rapidly your costs are going to go up. So we're sitting there with maybe an unsolvable problem. But fortunately, should I try this again or no? But fortunately, General Mills had, about a year earlier, we had actually signed a contract to sponsor a NASCAR Winston Cup car, the Cheers number 43, and we were working with Roush Racing. I don't know whether we've got many racing fans in here, but we were working with Roush Racing, and we had an opportunity about a year earlier, some of us, to go to Charlotte and visit their facility where they actually build the race cars, and the pit crews actually work on getting faster and faster and faster. And so before we came out to Lodi, that was the one thing that we thought about. What if we had some of the Lodi's technicians actually go to Lodi, spend time with the pit crews, and maybe possibly pick up some things that they could bring back to help improve their overall efficiency. So we walked into the meeting, and we were talking just, what we're going to do here. And you could just see it wasn't fear, but you could see the concern and the strain on the employees' faces. I mean, it was just the kind of environment that you don't ever want to be a part of. And they earnestly wanted to do whatever they could to correct this problem, and so did everybody else. And I remember talking about, we just have to get these changeovers down, so that they're much, much faster. And Billy Walker, who was a young steward who had moved from New Jersey, was in there. I really liked Billy. He was a very smart guy, and his heart was in the right place. But boy, he didn't mind giving Randy Darcy a hard time anytime I came to the plant. And so we'd gone through what probably needed to be done, and Billy raises his hand up in the back of the room. I'm thinking, oh no. So I said, yeah, Billy, what you got? And he said, Mr. Darcy, just tell me, just how fast do you think we ought to be able to do these changeovers for us to be successful? And he just absolutely caught me flat-footed. We had looked at lots and lots of stuff, but I never really zeroed in on just how fast would they have to be able to do it in order to become competitive again. But I didn't want to look like I was flat-footed, of course. And off the top of my head, I said, 45 minutes. And there was just a gasp, right? And everybody, it's impossible. You can't go from 4.5 hours to 45 minutes. But I said, but there's one thing we might be able to do. Any of you guys interested in racing? Yeah, several people raised their hand. I said, well, we've made arrangements for some of you to go to Charlotte, spend time with Roush Racing, see what you can learn from the pit crew and bring it back if you have an interest in doing that. And everybody's hand goes up, They all wanted to go, but we ended up sending 6 people. They spent a week with the race team, went to the actual race. They came back, and they had tons of ideas of what they could do. And if you think about a pit crew, I mean, not only do they do, gas and tires every time they pit, but they have to be prepared to fix that car if it's wrecked at some point and get it back on the track right away, right? So it's amazing the things that they learn to do. But one thing they brought back that I thought was the best of all the ideas is a pit crew actually videotapes every time they pit. And the next week, that crew and everybody else that they can get together will analyze the tape and come up with ideas on how they could improve things. And the Lodi guys brought that back. They bought video equipment. They started filming their changeovers. They would do things like put sockets on both sides of a socket wrench so they didn't have to change the socket out. They went in and they took some mixing equipment that was very difficult to clean, and they funded a second unit so they could just roll one in, roll the other one out. But to make a long story short, in about 2.5 months, they made tremendous improvements in those changeovers. Do you think they got it down to 45 minutes? Yeah, they did. They got it down to 23 minutes, right? 23 minutes. And not only did they fix that production line, but they applied that same technique to all the rest of the production lines in the plants. And then the other plants throughout North America heard about what they were doing, and they would invite technicians to come to Lodi and learn how they had done this. And so that one single idea not only got applied there, it got applied all across North America. And you can just imagine the financial impact on the company. So next slide. So this team became kind of a superstar, if you would, and Fortunate Magazine had heard about it, and they called and asked if there was any way they could come in and interview some of these technicians, and we said, sure, absolutely, they'd love to do it. So they came in, and they interviewed them, and they were so impressed. It wasn't just, I don't know whether you can read that. Can you see that? You going to read it for me? But anyway, they came in and they said, this is a cover story. This is just not a Fortune magazine cover. It's a cover story. And I want you to hear one of the quotes from the magazine because it is so good and so powerful. I should have brought that in with me. There it is. If Harvard awarded MBAs to factory workers for their expertise, this team at the General Mills plant in Lodi, California would graduate with honors. Can you imagine that? Isn't that cool? So General Mills had just experienced what we call, and we can sequence the slides, what we would call adaptive innovation. And adaptive innovation for us was simply identifying a skill or a capability, whether it's a maintenance skill, whether it's a training skill, whether it's a recruiting skill, whether it's whatever is important for your business or your organization. You'd identify that, and then you'd try to find somebody somewhere in the country who did that really, really well, like the pit crew on the changeovers. We'd engage with them, and we'd ask them if they would be willing to share, what they do and how they do it. Ideally, have some of us actually embed in their organization for a while so we could lift that up and put it right into our organization. And you know what we didn't need to be able to do that? Creativity and conceptualization skills. So all of a sudden, it wasn't just 20% of our organization that could innovate. Now 100% of the organization could innovate for us, right, going forward. These were some of the next slide. These were some of the best practice partners that we had. And the other thing on the other side, it wasn't just us taking from them good ideas. We would then offer, anything they wanted to see in General Mills that wasn't competitively proprietary. We would let them see. They would let them come into our organization, and then they would see some things that they could take back to theirs. We never did it with a competitor. We never did it actually with anybody really in the food business. But to just give you some idea of how this worked, we were with the U.S. Marshals. It was a fugitive apprehension team. If there's time, I'll share a couple of points, stories about that. We were looking at tactical planning and execution with them. Cirque du Soleil. Basic creative capabilities. We went down to Houston to see how the training was done with the astronauts. We were actually on a set. This is one of the craziest ones. We were on a set. I think it was the Young and Restless soap opera. Some of you probably don't remember them, but we were there to really understand how to lead in a diverse organization. And we used how the actors train and how they learn how to be the person that they're acting. That was tremendous learning in terms of being able to lead somebody, if you can walk in their shoes, if you will. And that's what we were trying to do with that one. Turned out to be great. The U.S. Thunderbirds was all about training and development. The B-1 bombers was maintenance. And then sky surfing was around rapid escalation of technology applications. So that just gives you some idea of the crazy places we went to find great ideas that we could apply. And it wasn't just well-known organizations like these. I remember there was an ice cream shop that we studied. There was a local fire department down in Covington, Georgia. There was a one-person travel agency. So the point here is it doesn't have to be big and bold. It just has to be somebody that does what you need to do better than you do it, and then you can reapply it. Okay, let's see. Okay, so we've covered one of the issues that prevent you from being able to innovate, right? You don't have to have creativity. You don't have to have conceptualization skills, but you do need to be motivated, right? An organization needs to be motivated, especially an organization that's doing well. And we don't have time to go into this today, but I think that's primarily the leader's role in an organization, to learn how to motivate. I mean, the leader, and it's not unlike, this is probably not a really good correlation, but it's not unlike your kids. For those of you who may have two children, if I said to you, do you motivate those two children the exact same way? And I'll bet you the answer 100% of the time is no. Do you motivate those children the same way from the time they're 6 until they're 25? The answer is no. Right? So an organization is the same way. It all depends on where that organization it is. Sometimes it's the stick that can motivate. Sometimes it's the carrot that can motivate. Some organizations just simply need for you to support them, be there and support. Some organizations need for you to let them go, be totally autonomous. And so it's the leader's role. And that really is another lunch and learn discussion, I think, to maybe Brian can find somebody that can teach that one. But leadership is critically important in motivating an organization, and you have to have it. The Lodi plant, if you look at that, they went from survival to superstars, right? And the motivation that was there was coming from completely different places. They were more motivated when they were a superstar. I mean, they wanted to show everybody just how good they were. But General Mills had bigger problems in the Lodi, California plant. We had two things that were a big problem for us. One of them was we were doing pretty well. If you looked at our financial results and you looked at how we were being rated by Wall Street, and if you looked at how each functional area was performing, it was pretty good. So why change? Why rock the boat, right? And that is a very tough situation to try to deal with. The second thing that we had a problem with was the organization, and that we were organized in functional areas. So we had a marketing and advertising division, right? We had a sales division. We had a regulatory compliance division. We had a manufacturing division. We had a purchasing division. And for each of those functional areas, there were leaders, senior leaders, and they were strong leaders. They were very good leaders. And their job was to promote functional expertise, right? They wanted to be the best manufacturing organization in the country, or they wanted to be the best advertising organization in the country. And by and large, General Mills did a great job with that. But what we realized is there was a huge amount of opportunity between the functions. And if any of you are part of an organization that has more than one department, I think you could relate to the fact that there's always a little bit of rub, right, between the different departments in an organization or a group. And that can really get in the way of making the right kinds of decisions. And what we found was, I'll give you one really good example. Marketing decides that they want to develop a new product. We want to develop this new Cheerios. It passes down to research and development. They develop the product pretty independently, but they develop a great new Cheerio. By the time it gets to the manufacturing plant, it's probably 3 or 4 times as expensive as it needs to be if they understood back here all the dynamics that were going to take place in manufacturing that product. For example, maybe you use some type of sugar. We'll make this kind of simple. Some type of sugar, right? And you manufacture all your products in the plant with that sugar. But product development decides, if I use a little different sugar, instead of coming from California, I use cane sugar from somewhere else, that's going to make a better product. When it gets to the plant, they have to inventory that. They have to purchase it. It creates a tremendous amount of inefficiencies and waste. And nobody really understood that across the supply chain. So, we really struggled with that for quite a while, because we didn't want to lose our functional expertise. But at the same time, we knew if we were going to really be able to innovate and offset these tremendous costs we were facing, that was the only place that we could see where there was really a gold mine's worth of opportunity for us. But we didn't know how to do it. I got a call from the chief deputy of the U.S. Marshal Service in Washington, D.C. one day, who knew a friend of mine, and he had told him about what we were doing with best practices. And he said, Duke Smith, and he said, Randy, is there any way that you would do a best practice with the U.S. Marshals? And I said, well, sure, we'll consider anything. What are you interested in? And he wanted to know about best practice and asked if I'd come and speak at their national conference, which we did. And I had pretty well concluded that there really wasn't anything that this law enforcement agency could do for us, and I kind of envisioned the U.S. Marshals, I'd watched The Fugitive and Tommy Lee Jones, and I'm thinking, that's okay. But Duke insisted. He said, we've got stuff here, that would really be beneficial for you. And but we talked, and I said, well, the thing we're really working on right now, the biggest problem we have is working across organizational boundaries. And he said, well, I've got just the thing for you. Yeah, what's that? And he said, why don't you fly out to San Diego and be part of Operation Trident? And the U.S. Marshals, 3 or 4 times a year, they'll go into large, major metropolitan areas, and they'll bring together the local law enforcement officers, and they'll go after the fugitives that are in that particular area. And I said, well, why would everyone do that? And he said, well, cops don't like each other. Cops in different organizations don't like each other. And the way they would do this is they would go into San Diego, the U.S. Marshals, 7 officers, and we had the California Highway Patrol, the Sheriff's Department, the city cops, and ATF. We're all part of this operation. And the very first day that we rolled in to work with them, and we were going to be embedded, this is called a VIP tour, the cops all were in their own little groups, ATF and city cops, and they were like that because of the rubs that existed. Who's going to get the credit? Who's going to get the funding? Who's going to actually lead this deal? And we I remember a couple of things that really stood out for me. I mean, we were driving, Duke was taking us to a shopping center. This was 2:30 a.m. in the morning, and we pull in the shopping center, and we see everybody. He opens up the trunk, and he's got bulletproof vests back there. And he said, "Here, put this on." So I'd never had a bulletproof vest. I've never actually seen one at that point. And I pulled this vest out, and I put it on. I'm thinking, this is pretty classy. This is pretty cool. And he said, and grab that jacket there and put that jacket on. And the jacket they had these flaps on the jacket, so you were undercover. And then once you went in on the bus and broke through the door, then you pull the flap down, police, right, all over. And it was kind of warm. And I'm thinking, well, I like this bulletproof vest. I think I'll just go with a bulletproof vest. And he said, put that jacket on. I said, well, it's kind of hot. I think I'll just go with this. And he looked at me and he said, Darcy, when they see you got that vest on, they're going to shoot you right in the head. Give me that jacket. Let me put that jacket on and strap that baby on there. So, but anyway, to make a long story short, I wish I had a little more time because there's a lot of key learning that came out of this time that we spent with the marshals. For 7 days, we would investigate, trying to find where the fugitives were. You do that during the day, and then at 2:30 in the morning, if you knew where one was, all 14 officers would go in and try to apprehend the fugitives. But what we learned is how important goal setting is. And as I talked to the leaders of the SWAT teams and this fugitive apprehensive effort, they said one thing that happens every single time when we say go, 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 and the two-person teams are busting into this house to apprehend somebody who's going to be armed and dangerous, he said all of those functional things just kind of melt away. All of the things that are associated with your law enforcement agency just kind of melt away. The only thing that's important, Randy, is that I know you've got my back, I've got your back, and we get out of this house safely. And it just completely melts away. And I'm thinking, you know what? That's true for General Mills. I mean, we're all concerned about the company, but it's the functional silo that most people are most concerned about. So as we talked about this as a senior leadership team, we decided that if we were really going to do this, if we were really going to force change, what we had to do was to be able to have a goal, an objective that was big enough and tough enough that you couldn't survive as a functional, right? It had to cut across the organization, and we did. We set a goal to hold unit costs flat for 10 years. Those of you that are in business would know that if you're facing inflationary pressure like that, there's no way in the world you could hold your unit costs flat for 10 years, let alone 3 years. But we decided we'd establish that goal. And the most important thing was we were going to communicate it publicly. It's one thing to have goals internally that you can manage. It's another to communicate it publicly. And I can remember speaking at the Food and Beverage Conference for the Wall Street analysts in Naples, Florida for the first time. They put me up there because they wanted somebody that they could laugh at. But I told them, typically you don't communicate beyond 3 years externally within a company. And we said for the next 3 years, and of course the analysts were very concerned about inflation and how we were going to be able to handle it. We said for the next 3 years we're going to hold our unit costs flat because we're going to innovate. And to this day, I can remember seeing it in the audience. There's probably 1,000 people out there, but I could see the people in the front row, and several of them were just chuckling and looking at each other and just chuckling, like that's not possible. He can't do that. And then after the talk, you go into a breakout session with questions and answers, and they just kept firing at me. How much cost cutting are you going to do? How long? You can't last forever. You can't make this happen. But we stuck to that, and at the end of the 10th year, we had held our unit costs flat, which was just an incredible result. And it was the result of literally thousands and thousands and thousands of employees focused on what we called holistic margin management across the company. Every time we had a business review or a business meeting, the first question that was always asked and needed to be answered was, what are you doing to manage holistic margin management? We do care about your functional expertise, but holistic margin management is the most important thing. And it was a huge breakthrough for General Mills. So I'll just close by saying that I hope some of this has been helpful. Innovation is a very, very powerful tool, but probably the best news is that everybody can do it. And you can do it not just in your business, but in your family and literally everything that you do. So I just say thank you for your time today. Good luck if you want to do some more innovation, and I hope all that just works fabulously for you. But thank you very much.
Well, Randy, I'm going to do a couple giveaways, and then we're going to give a couple minutes for you to catch your breath, and we will let you do some Q&A here. But Man, what a joy to have you. And we know we need to innovate our microphones here and our PowerPoint, but we're gonna get there. So, hey, thank you again for joining us. We have a couple of mugs from Seven Corners Coffee. Randy mentioned that earlier today. One of the initiatives that we have here is a coffee shop in a couple locations, one at the University of Minnesota and one here on campus. And 207097, you're going to get this white fellow mug. These are amazing, amazing mugs. So anybody, 207097? That's right there, Philip Shorey. All right, awesome. And then this one comes with free drinks for a month. So here you go. Keep filling this one up, and it's 207082. 207082. Go up before you leave here, Sarah. You are good to go on that. All right, Randy, you got your breath? I'll take this mic around, and we'll do some Q&A. If you've got a question for Randy, raise your hand, and we'll bring a microphone to you. So, innovative mic stands too. This is one of those days. I was at a lunch and learn yesterday with one of my friends here, and the microphone didn't work for the whole thing too. So we get it. We get it. So it's happening in lunch and learns this week. Yep.
Hey, Randy, thank you. I'm more of like a sales general management leader, but I actually had for 6 years, I actually was responsible for a manufacturing plant in West Central Minnesota. Did you, you had big plants. This is a plant of like 100 people. But did you have little innovation pods or encourage people to break out in groups? Because I think as a small or medium business, we may not have the resources to tap NASCAR, which would be incredible, right? Learnings like that. So maybe more in that more small, medium business area, just fostering the innovation or adaptive innovation, right? If you don't have those creativity skills naturally, right? So just a question about that, if you did that more in a smaller setting with teams, right, to sort of come up with that.
Yeah, good question. So let me just make sure I understand. It's General Mills was a large company, but what if you had a smaller company with smaller teams, and could you really operate with smaller teams working on innovation?
And maybe didn't have access to other Fortune 500 companies, or you could rub shoulders with.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, we absolutely you can do that. In fact, where this went for us is it ended up being smaller teams, and if you look at some of the potential follow-up action steps. One of them is to once a month, I think, and they would do this once a month. The team, sometimes 3 people, sometimes 20 people, would sit around once a month and talk about, well, what innovations have we generated this month for a team? So it can be small, it can be large. In terms of people to do best practices with, remember that we had a whole sales force across North America, and we had all the manufacturing operations, and they were able to connect with all kinds of different organizations, small and large, that were willing to do this. And what was really surprising is people that you would think may not want to do that, I don't want to fool around with something like that, they were all mostly very, very interested in this whole idea of a best practice and sharing ideas. So I think you can do it with small company, large groups, small groups, really effective. I think small groups might even be more effective, quite frankly. Yeah.
All right, other questions? Yep, right here.
I assume Pillsbury was one of your competitors. You doing this, did your competitors catch on to what's going on and get involved in this also?
Question is, what happens when your competitors find out about what you're doing, when Pillsbury found out?
Yeah. We ended up buying Pillsbury, and not as a result of best practices, but we did, and the Pillsbury organization was very much a part of the best practice work that we did. And it actually started before the acquisition of Pillsbury, but that was one of the main reasons, I think it's okay to say this now, that was one of the main reasons that we saw a great synergy with that acquisition, is because we could apply, this concept with what they were doing. In terms of other competitors, we had, I know Kellogg's was after us, they were trying to find out what we were doing, and they actually would follow up with some of the people we've done best practices with, to say, you let General Mills in, will you let us in too, So there was some interest in that, especially after the Fortune 500 story. They got a lot of exposure, and there was a lot of interest there.
All right over here.
Your goal, what was the next goal, and are you in that goal right now?
The question, I think, is after this first goal, after that 10-year goal, what was the next goal that we put in place, and are they in it now? I've been retired now for a while, so I'm not sure, exactly, where they are right now. But the next phase, we were probably 5 years into this, and it was obvious that there was a really good shot that we were going to be able to make it, because we were just overwhelmed with ideas, that existed between the functional cracks. And the next big idea was centered around acquisitions, and you may have seen, well, I'm not going to talk about that one. But it was really around acquisitions, and how do you learn how to do acquisitions in a way that dramatically reduces the risk. If you look at most acquisitions and mergers, a high percentage of them just don't work out properly. And we knew that was a growth area that we needed to work on, and we set some pretty demanding goals in that area about how we would be able to assess and move forward with a much, much higher hit rate going forward.
Anybody else? Yes.
Hi, Randy. My name is Matthew. Thank you, first of all, for this presentation. I think there's some awesome content in here for all of us, no matter our background. I've got a specific question for you. I just completed a ministry school. So as a person of faith, I'm really curious about how you think about innovation in the church in particular. I think sometimes that can almost be a dirty word for traditional mindsets in the church environment. What opportunities are you seeing? Is it the best practices sort of work? What opportunities do you see for people of faith in terms of how we're, one, obviously cultivating our own internal environment, but then two, influencing culture, and how, would you maybe frame up some of those for either lay people or people in ministry?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I was leading that, I would first of all say, when you look at accountability, if we take a church environment and you look at accountability, who are the leaders in the church and the staff in the church? Who are they really accountable to? If you're running a business, you've got to make a profit, right? And if you don't make a profit, then you're in trouble, right? And all of your employees are in trouble. So when I look at a church, I would think for me, one of the hardest things is to think about who are we really accountable to. We're accountable to God, obviously, right? In executing our job effectively, but who are we accountable to on a daily basis? And I'd kind of take a look at that and figure out a way to put more accountability into what we're doing as a church in a way that can really be measured. And I think some churches, and I'm being very generic about this now, but I think some churches do a really good job of that. I mean, and they set objectives and they go after objectives. But I would definitely try to do that. And I think when you do that, again, you're establishing goals and objectives, and people will line up behind that with the right kind of leadership. And once that happens, then I think best practice application for a church is maybe even more effective and easier to do than it would be for a business, because there's just so many things, so many complexities involved in the kind of an organization like a church that I think you could learn a tremendous amount of stuff. So I don't know whether I'm answering your question really well, but that's just the way kind of a business person would look at it,
So, Randy, we had a question submitted earlier. Somebody asked me to ask you this. So as a student of innovation, what innovations are you most excited about, just kind of emerging innovations that you see culturally? And then is there anything that you are afraid of when it comes to innovation?
Yeah, I think in terms of being afraid, AI is something that I wouldn't say afraid, but boy, I tell you, that has so much power to change so many things in this world, right? Artificial intelligence. And that one concerns me. How that's going to be handled, because it's very powerful and it's moving forward, like a giant wave. Nobody's going to stop it. It's going to be here. But so that's one. I think healthcare is probably another one. I think the ability to once and for all eliminate some of the serious health issues that we have, around the world would be one. And I think that innovation can do that, if we focus on it. And I don't know. I this is kind of corny, but I think that relationships. If we look at today, relationships within families, marriage relationships, business relationships, friends. I think there's so much opportunity for all those things to be better, so much better. And I do believe that if you are working on those things with an innovative mindset, that they will get better. But sometimes we just let those relationships just kind of play out. But
Okay, we're going to do two last questions, Philip and then Gigi.
Okay.
this is like the guy in Lodi right here. He always asks tough questions.
I'm going to try to formulate this question. Is there a time in companies when they should not innovate? Like, how is that decided? Have you ever seen that? For example, the guy that said, hey, this sugar would be better implemented, and maybe it's like a cheaper sugar, it's worse for the consumer, but it's going to make a profit for the company, and for the well-being of the public should probably not be innovated. But, so how is that discussion ever, like, on a corporate level, in the DNA of a company? Like, I don't know, can you speak to that on when innovation maybe is not a good idea?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think the answer is, do you execute or not? Not do you innovate or not. So I would say you always innovate. You're always going to innovate. You're always going to look for that sugar, that's better. But then you pause and you say, what decision do we need to make here? Are we going to put that in place? Maybe it's not as healthy or not as good, or do we back off from that? And that decision has always been made, whether you're innovating or not, right? I mean, from day one, you have to make a decision about whether or not this change is going to be good or bad for your customers and for your company. So I would say never stop innovating, ever, 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 because you can always not execute, not put it in place. But you sure don't want to miss the opportunity to at least evaluate that new sugar. Right? Yeah. Very good. Yeah, it is. But you have, thousands more trade-offs that you can kind of pick and choose from if you're innovating broadly. Yeah.
Right here. Hi.
Hi, yeah.
I have a personal question for you. As a person of faith and being in the position that you were in General Mills, did you find it hard or, difficult to innovate your faith as a believer in the corporate world, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Did everybody hear that question? I guess to be totally honest with you, I never really tried to put my faith out there or evangelize in that kind of environment because for some of my career anyway, I was in a position where you could inappropriately influence people, based on what you said, and people would do things thinking, well, Randy thinks that's pretty cool if I do that, So I really tried to be careful with what I said. And what I tried to do was let the decisions I made and the way that I operated speak for itself, And ideally, you'd want somebody to say, there's something different about that guy, And I'm not saying that's true about me, but you want them to say there's something different about that person. It's not a typical corporate executive that, will do anything to make a buck. And I thought that was the best way that I could try to help.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Again, Randy, thank you so much for taking the time. He did this out of the goodness of his heart, and that's just kind of the guy Randy is. And I'll cook the tacos with these shells later on. All right, so we'll have some fun. But hey, it has been an honor to have all of you here today. Again, if this was your first time at Wooddale for one of these events, we'd love to have you back. I promise you, our AV will be better next time. That wasn't on Randy or our AV guy. We just had some issues today, and I apologize about that. We have a wonderful, wonderful summer schedule. Again, it's on the table. Feel free to take those with you, put them on your fridge, share them with people at work if you think it's a benefit. If you are a company and you work for a company and you like what we're doing here, or you would like to have one of our speakers someday come to your place of employment and do a lunch and learn, we will take some of these on the road. We can't do it with all of these, but we will take many of these on the road, and it would be our honor to do that, and we do that at no fee to you. We want to be a blessing to the community and just be able to help your workplace. So maybe talk to your HR director, talk to whoever it is that you've got there that does employee benefits. We've got a lot of great topics, and again, our hope is just to be a blessing to the community. We know that companies and schools and hospitals and organizations all have people who have been impacted by these last few years who can use just being built into, and we want that to be a gift. And you can find our contact information at familyresource.info on the web, and it would be our honor to do that. Randy, we'll stick around for a little bit if you've got a personal question you want to ask him. Otherwise, we're going to let you go. Have a great week. No Lunch and Learn next week because of the holiday weekend coming up that weekend, but we'll be back again in 2 weeks, okay? Have a great day. Thank you.